Kathy Englebert's resignation didn't happen in a vacuum. It erupted at the intersection of internal unrest, outdated leadership, and the meteoric rise of Caitlin Clark. The league's long-standing culture of cautious growth and centralized control was ill-prepared for the disruptive force Clark brought. Her popularity exploded, drawing massive audiences and sponsorship dollars. Yet the league failed to capitalize quickly. As Nike stepped in with a headline-making endorsement, Engelbert's leadership came under fire for misreading the moment. If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe. Her departure marks more than a personal career shift. It represents the collapse of an entire management philosophy that couldn't keep up with the new pace of women's sports. With Engelbert out, the WNBA is poised for a full-scale reinvention. Nike's strategic partnership with Clark is leading the charge, pushing the league toward global branding, star-centered visibility, and aggressive marketing, a complete break from the era of humility and restraint. The next commissioner won't be tasked with maintaining order. They'll be expected to supercharge exposure, boost salaries, and let the stars lead the way. In this new climate, profitability will come not from collective balance, but from high wattage, individual-driven appeal. And Clark, backed by a corporate giant and a worldwide platform, has become the face of that transformation. The WNBA didn't quietly drift into change. It was shoved there. And the force behind it wasn't a committee, a strategy memo, or a long-term lead plan. It was Caitlin Clark becoming unavoidable. Every conversation about the league's future started circling back to the same reality. Her name was driving ratings, sponsorships, headlines, and money at a scale the league had never experienced. This wasn't just about performance on the court. Clark's rise came with nonstop media attention, packed arenas, and an audience that followed her wherever she went. Interviews weren't framed as feel-good rookie features anymore. They were business conversations, revenue conversations, visibility conversations. The league wasn't asking whether Caitlin Clark mattered. It was trying to figure out what to do now that she clearly did, and that's where the tension started. Because the WNBA had spent years operating under a model that treated players as a collective brand, not individual engines of growth. Clark broke that model by existing. Her presence forced a question the league hadn't wanted to answer yet. What happens when one player becomes bigger than the system built to contain her? As Clark's profile exploded, every press appearance carried more weight. Her words were dissected. Her image was everywhere. And with each appearance, the imbalance became harder to ignore. The league was benefiting from her visibility, but it wasn't fully structured to amplify it. The attention she drew highlighted the gap between old-school caution and modern sports marketing. This wasn't about Clark demanding special treatment. It was about the ecosystem around her struggling to keep up. The league's messaging remained conservative, while the audience reaction was anything but. Viewership spikes weren't subtle. Merchandise demand wasn't theoretical. This was measurable, undeniable growth tied directly to one player. Press conferences became a symbol of that disconnect. Clark spoke like a modern athlete aware of her platform, while league leadership sounded restrained, careful, almost uncomfortable with how fast things were moving. That contrast wasn't lost on fans, sponsors, or corporate partners watching closely. At the center of the growing tension was Commissioner Kathy Engelbert. Her leadership style had long emphasized stability, caution, and gradual progress. That approach had worked in a league fighting for survival. But Clark's rise changed the stakes. The WNBA wasn't just seeking respect anymore. It was staring at a genuine commercial breakthrough. Engelbert's public statements reflected a league trying to balance tradition with disruption. She acknowledged Clark's impact, but the league's actions lagged behind the moment. Internally, frustration grew. Externally, pressure mounted. Sponsors and media partners didn't want patience. They wanted momentum. The leadership environment became increasingly strained. Decisions felt reactive instead of bold. Opportunities appeared to pass without being fully seized. In a moment that demanded aggressive marketing and star-driven strategy, the league hesitated. And that hesitation became impossible to separate from the commissioner herself. The relationship between the league office and its biggest star became symbolic of a deeper conflict. On one side, Clark represented a new era. unapologetically visible, commercially powerful, and globally marketable. On the other, league leadership represented an older framework built on restraint and collective identity. This wasn't a personal feud. It was structural. The league had been designed to protect itself from relying too heavily on one player. But Clark wasn't asking permission to be a phenomenon. Her popularity existed, whether the league was comfortable with it or not. As Nike stepped in with a massive endorsement deal, that imbalance became impossible to ignore. The deal wasn't just about shoes. It was about confidence. Nike was betting big, publicly, and globally on Clark as the face of women's basketball. That bet quietly highlighted what the league had been slow to fully embrace. Nike's move shifted the power dynamic overnight. It validated what fans had already been saying. Star power drives growth. Clark wasn't just part of the league's future. She was actively shaping it. Her deal included international exposure, signaling a global strategy that went far beyond domestic viewership. Clark didn't need to criticize the league to expose its limitations. Her success did that on its own. Every sponsorship announcement raised the same question. If brands see this value, why doesn't the league structure fully reflect it yet? This was the moment where the old narrative of gratitude started to collapse. Clark wasn't lucky to be here. The league was lucky to have her. That shift in perception marked a turning point not just for Clark, but for how women's basketball could be marketed moving forward. On the court, the numbers backed everything up. Attendance surged. Broadcast broke records. Games featuring Clark weren't just sporting events. They were media moments. The league's visibility spiked wherever she played, reinforcing the argument that star-centered promotion wasn't a risk, but a necessity. This success exposed the internal divide even further. Some within the league saw opportunity. Others saw a loss of control. The idea that one player could wield this much influence unsettled a system built on uniformity. As the season unfolded, it became clear that something had to give. The league could either adapt to this reality or be reshaped by it. And the pressure of that decision landed squarely on leadership. Kathy Engelbert's resignation didn't come out of nowhere. It was a culmination of mounting pressure, internal conflict, and a league standing at a crossroads. Her departure symbolized the end of an era defined by caution and the beginning of one driven by visibility, marketing, and star power. What comes next is a league rethinking itself in real time. A new commissioner is expected to lean into what Clark represents rather than bracing against it. More television exposure, more aggressive branding, more acknowledgement that individual athletes can elevate the entire product. This shift isn't just about one player or one deal. It's about a cultural reset. The WNBA is entering a phase where marketability and celebrity are no longer treated as uncomfortable side effects, but as central pillars of growth. And as Caitlin Clark continues to dominate attention on and off the court, the message is clear. The league's future will be louder, bolder, and unapologetically star-driven. If you're watching this unfold, make sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more coverage as this new era takes shape. The tipping point wasn't quiet. It wasn't subtle. It came in the form of a Nike deal worth more than just the money. It was a declaration. The kind of deal that doesn't just elevate a player, it redefines what the league can be. When Clark sat down for interviews after the news broke, she didn't need to say much. The message had already landed. This wasn't about being the future of the WNBA. She was already its present. A player who didn't just lead in stats, but led in leverage. A player who now had a global brand behind her, broadcasting a vision of women's basketball that didn't wait for league approval. She wasn't asking for a spotlight. She was building one and daring the league to catch up. Nike's investment made one thing brutally clear. Clark was now too big to sideline, and any system not built around her star power was already obsolete. In front of the press, the tone had changed. Clark wasn't tentative. She spoke like someone who understood her role wasn't just athlete. It was symbol, spokesperson, asset. Her language echoed what the league itself had resisted for years, the acknowledgement that visibility and commercial appeal were no longer optional in women's sports. They were survival. With reporters pressing for insight on her deal, Clark made it clear she wasn't distracted by the noise. But that didn't mean she was blind to the moment. The Nike contract wasn't just about her bank account. It was about setting a precedent, a benchmark, a blueprint. And every time she sat behind that mic, it became more obvious that the league either had to evolve around her or be left behind entirely. Cameras didn't lie. Every game she played was a visual contradiction to the league's slow-moving past. Sold-out arenas, jerseys flying off shelves, social media clips doing numbers that rivaled men's leagues. This wasn't hypothetical buzz. It was hard evidence. Clark's games looked different, felt different. They didn't need narrative spins or gimmicks. They delivered on their own. The energy around her wasn't just fanfare, it was ROI, return on investment. And in that atmosphere, the question wasn't whether the WNBA could afford to center her. It was whether it could afford not to. Those match photos weren't just sport shots. They were marketing assets. Proof of life in a league that had spent years trying to prove it deserved mainstream attention. Meanwhile, Engelbert was giving exit interviews that sounded like damage control. Talking points about league growth, respect, and expansion. But what they'd include said more. There was no mention of the internal friction over Clark's rise. No acknowledgement of how slow the league had moved to capitalize on her. The leadership vacuum wasn't an accident. It was a consequence of hesitation, of failing to pivot. Engelbert didn't leave in triumph. She left surrounded by noise, fueled by people who saw her resignation as a necessary step for the league to embrace the future it was already being pulled into. She had helped stabilize the league. But stability, it turned out, wasn't enough anymore. Clark didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The power shift spoke for itself. Every endorsement, every headline, every new viewership record was a reminder that the league's old guard had been reactive when it needed to be visionary. Her public statements weren't laced with criticism, but the implications were impossible to miss. She knew her value. Nike knew her value. Fans knew it. Broadcasters knew it. The only ones dragging their feet had been the people in charge of the league's direction. So now, with a commissioner seat open and media frenzy around her, Clark stood in a place no one in the WNBA had stood before, with cultural, commercial, and global leverage, not symbolic power. Actual, that dynamic, the rising star and the departing commissioner, captured the league's inflection point. Engelbert represented the era of caution, of modest ambition, and internal loyalty. Clark stood for the era of scale, of monetization, of branding and strategy. The two weren't enemies, but their roles were incompatible in the system as it stood. Engelbert's resignation cleared the path for a new kind of leadership, one that wouldn't ask whether star power should be centered, but how fast it could be maximized. This wasn't about betraying the values of the league. It was about acknowledging that visibility isn't a threat. It's the product. The face of the league had always been a theoretical debate, until now. Clark's face wasn't just recognizable. It was bankable. She had gone from college phenom to pro cornerstone in record time, and with every close-up on broadcast, every photo making its rounds on social media, it was clear. This wasn't a moment. It was a movement. And with Nike's backing, that movement was no longer regional or niche. It was international. Clark's deal included global tour plans and cross-border marketing. The WNBA wasn't just growing. It was being invited to evolve into a global brand. Whether it wanted to or not, there's no graceful middle ground when the stakes are this high. You either chase the growth or get run over by it. When Caitlin Clark sat down for interviews after the Nike news broke, she wasn't just answering questions about the deal. She was defining a new standard, not just for herself, but for every player who would come after her. Her tone was calm, but her presence was loud. You could tell she understood the weight of the moment. This wasn't a typical athlete-brand partnership. This was a message. The WNBA was now on a timeline dictated by players with platforms, not slow-moving league meetings. Nike didn't just see Clark as a talented athlete. They saw her as a media product, a franchise on her own. And the fact that it wasn't the league leading the charge, but a corporation, said everything. Clark's interviews were happening under the Nike spotlight, while the WNBA scrambled to catch up to the world already watching her. If you scroll through photos from any Clark game this season, the narrative was right there in the stands. Packed crowds, camera crews, kids wearing her jersey, adults wearing her jersey. Courtside seats sold out in minutes. She was the first player in a long time who made regular season WNBA games feel like marquee events. And yet, the league had been slow to amplify that image. While Nike was producing high-gloss campaigns, the WNBA's social presence still felt like it hadn't caught up to the scale of what was happening. The contrast between the Clark-fueled hype and the league's muted promotion was jarring. Game after game, Clark's performances delivered more than just numbers. They delivered visibility. But instead of leading that parade, the league felt like it was being dragged along behind it, hoping to look in control. It was never clearer than in the close-up moments. That now iconic look, focused, composed, never flustered, became a staple on broadcasts. She didn't look overwhelmed by the pressure. She looked like someone who had already accepted what was coming and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Her face became the face of women's basketball. Not symbolically. Literally. Ads, thumbnails, headlines. It was always her. And with that came the reality that marketing, sponsorships, and coverage weren't following the league's internal ranking systems anymore. They were following engagement. They were following relevance. And whether the league was ready to admit it or not, Clark had become the sun. Everything else revolved around her. As the noise grew, Kathy Engelbert's voice started to sound increasingly out of sync with the moment. She still talked about long-term growth, sustainable expansion, and staying true to the league's roots. But the problem wasn't the goals. It was the tone. The energy had shifted. The industry had shifted. But Engelbert hadn't. And while her legacy included real wins, like salary increases and new team investments, those victories started to feel like yesterday's news in the face of today's urgency. She wasn't fired, but she didn't stay. That says a lot. And her quiet exit spoke louder than any quote. The league didn't just lose a commissioner. It closed a chapter, one defined by caution, internal consensus, and waiting for external validation. By contrast, Clark's presence at press conferences only got more confident. The media asked, and she delivered. There were no missteps, no canned answers, just clarity. The kind of clarity that didn't ask for permission to lead. It assumed leadership. She didn't need to say, "I'm the face of the league." She just was. Sponsors acted like it. The media treated her like it. Fans followed her like it. And when she sat behind those microphones, it was clear she wasn't caught up in her moment. She was driving it. What was once seen as controversial, centering one player, now felt inevitable. And every time the league delayed that pivot, it looked more out of touch. Clark never lobbied for control. She didn't have to. The numbers spoke for her. She led in jersey sales. She led in viewership spikes. She was the headline even when she wasn't playing. When she spoke publicly, it was measured, but assertive. She knew she had leverage, and she wasn't wasting it on drama. She was focused on scale, growth, legacy. Her statements reflected that mindset, not playing it safe, but playing it smart. She wasn't here to be a team player in an outdated system. She was here to win and bring the whole league with her, whether it was ready or not. The contrast between Engelbert and Clark told the whole story. One was the gatekeeper. The other was the disruptor. And only one of them was still standing. Engelbert's leadership had been defined by structure. Clark's emergence required fluidity. Engelbert prioritized league-wide equity. Clark forced the league to prioritize impact. And when the two collided, something had to give. The handoff wasn't personal. It was structural. And now, with Engelbert gone, the league has to decide how fast it wants to build a future that reflects the present. A future where stars aren't seen as risky. They're seen as a product. The question now isn't whether Clark deserves to lead the WNBA's new era. She already is. The only question left is who's going to follow her and how fast. Every time Clark speaks now, it feels like a press release from the future. She doesn't need to shout or demand attention. It's already there. She's become the kind of player whose presence changes the room, whose quotes spark headlines, whose image gets reshared before she even leaves a podium. And the message that keeps cutting through? This is no longer about waiting for respect. It's about moving forward with or without it. Clark doesn't owe the league her loyalty. She's giving it her value. That's the trade. That's the new balance of power. There's a difference between being grateful and being undervalued. Clark knows it. The brands know it. And now, finally, the league is being forced to know it too. What happens next is simple. The WNBA either adapts to the blueprint Clark has drawn, or it risks becoming the story of how opportunity was wasted. The old playbook, one built on caution and modesty, isn't fit for this moment. Clark isn't asking for the league to revolve around her. It already does. And if leadership can accept that, embrace that, build around that, women's basketball will finally have its breakout era. Not as a slow climb, but as a global, star-driven, unapologetically commercial force. The next commissioner won't just be managing a league. They'll be managing a transformation. They'll be making decisions not just for parity, but for reach, revenue, and relevance. And Clark? She'll be at the center of it, with cameras flashing, banners waving, and the world watching. If you've been watching this unfold and thinking, something big is happening, you're right. So hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed. Because this isn't just a shift, it's a full-on takeover. And it's only just getting started.